April 1944. Featherstone Park Camp, Northumberland, England. The plate clattered as Oberfeldwebel Karl Schmidt's hand trembled. Not from fear, he had survived Tobruk and El Alamein, but from disbelief. The British officer had just asked him, a prisoner of war, to prepare dinner for a gathering of Allied commanders. After 8 months in captivity following the Afrika Korps surrender, subsisting on basic rations, this reversal of fortunes seemed impossible. "We understand you were head cook for General von Thommer's staff," the British captain said in passable German. "Our mess officer has taken ill. Would you be willing to prepare a proper dinner for visiting brass?" Schmidt stared at the officer, searching for the trap. Nazi instruction had prepared him for interrogation, deprivation, perhaps torture. Not this bizarre request to serve his captors voluntarily. Across Britain in spring 1944, 175,247 German prisoners of war occupied hundreds of hastily constructed camps. Most performed agricultural labour or cleared bomb damage, tasks requiring minimal skill and posing little security risk. But the British Army faced an unexpected shortage: skilled kitchen personnel. With 52% of trained military cooks deployed to active theatres, officer messes throughout Britain struggled to maintain standards. Featherstone Park's commanding officer, Colonel James Harrington, former Oxford history professor, had suggested an unorthodox solution. The camp held 147 captured German officers and 302 enlisted men, including 17 with professional culinary training. Wehrmacht records meticulously noted soldiers' civilian occupations, documentation that fell into British hands during the North African campaign. The German military cooking tradition differed significantly from British practices. The Wehrmacht maintained dedicated cooking schools where selected personnel completed intensive 16-week courses. German field kitchens, the famous Gulaschkanonen, goulash cannons, represented superior mobile cooking technology. British officers had grudgingly acknowledged this superiority after capturing intact field kitchens in Tunisia. Karl Schmidt had trained at the Wehrmacht cooking school in Dresden before the war. For 3 years he had managed to create respectable meals from increasingly limited supplies as Rommel's supply lines stretched across Libya. Even as fuel and ammunition dwindled, officers' meals remained a priority. A disciplined army required well-fed leadership. When Schmidt entered the officers' mess kitchen, his professional assessment was immediate. The 22 x 18-foot facility contained adequate equipment, though arranged inefficiently by German standards. A coal-fired Aga range dominated one wall alongside 2 gas burners. The pantry revealed unexpected treasures: 4 pounds of butter, fresh eggs, real coffee, 3 bottles of decent French wine. These supplies exceed what General von Thommer received in his final months, Schmidt later wrote in a letter home, carefully worded to pass British censors. According to British Army quartermaster records, officer messes received special allocations exceeding standard rations. While civilian butter rations stood at 2 ounces weekly per person, officer messes received 6 ounces per officer. Coffee, almost unobtainable for civilians at 1 ounce monthly when available, flowed relatively freely in officer quarters at 4 ounces weekly per officer. Schmidt hesitated initially. The Geneva Convention permitted requiring POWs to work, but cooking for enemy officers seemed a special humiliation. Then again, it meant access to a proper kitchen, meaningful work, perhaps extra rations. "I will require an assistant," Schmidt countered, his professional pride emerging. Gefreiter Meyer was sous chef at the Adlon Hotel before the war. The captain nodded. "Arrange it. Dinner for 12 officers at 19 Psych. Supplies are limited, but make something German. They're curious." That evening, Schmidt and Meyer produced a simplified sauerbraten with potato dumplings and red cabbage. They adapted the recipe for available ingredients, substituting British vinegar for German Essig, garden herbs for traditional juniper berries. The meat, a decent cut of beef, had been aged 3 days, inadequate for proper sauerbraten, but better than expected. When the first plates returned empty, Schmidt felt an unexpected pride. The second British officer to finish, a brigadier with campaign ribbons from the Great War, approached the kitchen door. "Convey my compliments to your German chef," he told the orderly. "First decent meal I've had since the Savoy in '39. Word spread quickly. Within a week, 3 more German cooks had been reassigned from general labour to kitchen duties. By May 1944, 27 POW camps across Britain had implemented similar arrangements. War Office Memorandum 147 KC 44, dated May 12th, officially sanctioned the practice while establishing supervisory protocols. For men who had expected harsh treatment as prisoners, this assignment represented unexpected dignity. One German cook from Munster Camp in Yorkshire expressed his confusion in a censored letter. "We cook, they eat, they thank us. This is not the England we were told to expect." The British War Office recognised an unexpected opportunity. Beyond solving a staffing shortage, these German cooks might absorb valuable lessons about British resources. Every egg cracked, every pound of meat prepared, every vegetable peeled, silently refuted Goebbels' propaganda about starving England. For Karl Schmidt, watching British officers savour his sauerbraten represented the first crack in his ideological armour. The enemy had not only captured him, but now complemented his cooking. The small kitchen at Featherstone Park became an unexpected battlefield where knives and skillets replaced guns and tanks, and where the first shots in a different kind of conquest had been fired. By autumn 1944, the War Office had formalised what began as improvisation. Directive 228 KP 44 established guidelines for employing German prisoners in officers' messes at 42 POW camps across Britain. According to military records, 174 German military cooks prepared approximately 4,600 meals daily for British officers, a task requiring 2,800 pounds of meat and 3,400 pounds of produce weekly. At Grisedale Hall in the Lake District, Feldwebel Wilhelm Müller confronted his first Yorkshire pudding with professional curiosity. The British officers expected this Sunday essential alongside their roast beef, yet no German military cook had encountered this strange batter that puffed dramatically in hot dripping. Müller, formerly pastry chef at Frankfurt's Steigenberger Hotel, studied the recipe with skepticism. "This cannot be correct," he told his British kitchen supervisor, pointing to the simple mixture of flour, eggs, milk and salt. "There must be yeast or baking powder." The supervisor shook his head. "Just air and heat, Fritz. Magic of British cooking." Müller's first attempt collapsed pathetically. His second, with adjustments to batter consistency and oven temperature, produced respectable results that drew unexpected compliments from discriminating British officers. By his 5th Sunday, Müller's Yorkshire puddings achieved a golden, crisp exterior with properly hollow centres, a small culinary victory that earned him an extra ration of cigarettes. According to kitchen records from Grisedale Hall, German cooks introduced techniques that improved British standards. They implemented the German mise en place system of preparation, reducing kitchen chaos during busy service periods. They introduced proper knife skills that improved efficiency and presentation. Most significantly, they applied rigorous temperature control that British military cooking had largely ignored. The cross-cultural exchange flowed both ways. German cooks discovered British ingredients unknown in Wehrmacht kitchens: Worcestershire sauce, Coleman's mustard, treacle, chutneys from India, marmalades from Scotland. These items appeared regularly in officer messes, despite civilian rationing that limited such luxuries to 8 ounces monthly per household when available. At Camp 186 near Colchester, Unteroffizier Heinrich Brandt encountered his first Christmas pudding in December 1944. The dense, alcohol-soaked dessert that British officers cherished represented everything German military cooking avoided: heavy, sweet and impractical for field conditions. Yet when asked to produce 12 puddings for Christmas dinner, Brandt approached the challenge with professional pride. "The pudding must be prepared 6 weeks before Christmas," explained the elderly British quartermaster sergeant, demonstrating the complex mixing ritual that included having each officer stir the batter for luck. Brandt's meticulous notes about this strange tradition survived in his post-war cookbook. The British believe this black pudding brings fortune if properly prepared. They add silver coins and tokens before cooking, an unsanitary practice I modified by wrapping items in waxed paper. The contrast between British rationing and officer mess provisions created occasional tension. While civilians received just 1 ounce of cheese weekly and 2 ounces of tea monthly, throughout 1944, officer messes allocated 6 ounces of cheese and 8 ounces of tea per officer weekly. Ministry of Food records confirm these disparities, justified as maintaining necessary standards for command effectiveness. Meat presented particular challenges for German cooks. British beef, averaging 18% fat content compared to German standards of 12%, required different cooking techniques. The British preference for well-done meat horrified German chefs trained to preserve juiciness and flavour. At Camp 23 near Sheffield, Gefreiter Otto Weber maintained 2 separate roasts at different temperatures. Proper medium rare for appreciative officers and overcooked for traditionalists. In their letters home, heavily censored but preserved in military archives, German cooks expressed surprise at certain British culinary contradictions. The nation that produced excellent cheeses served them ice-cold with bland crackers. The country with access to empire-wide spices prepared dishes with minimal seasoning. The military that conquered global territories couldn't properly prepare vegetables without reducing them to formless mush. They have access to ingredients we haven't seen since 1939, wrote one German cook from Camp 21 in Scotland, yet they boil everything until colour and flavour disappear. It is a culinary tragedy I'm slowly correcting. By spring 1945, German cooks had introduced subtle changes to British officer mess traditions. Vegetables retained texture and colour. Sauces gained complexity through proper reduction techniques. Presentation improved significantly, with German military precision applied to plating and garnishing. The statistics tell the story of growing appreciation. According to mess records from 16 camps, complaint rates about food quality declined 78% in facilities employing German cooks. Officer attendance at evening meals increased 34%, reducing informal dining in nearby villages and conserving fuel and transport resources. For the German cooks, this appreciation created conflicted emotions. Their professional pride flourished while their national identity faced daily challenges. Each successful meal served to enemy officers represented both personal achievement and implicit acknowledgement of changing fortunes. At Featherstone Park, Karl Schmidt now managed a kitchen staff of 7 German POWs, preparing 3 meals daily for 42 British officers. His weekly planning meetings with the British quartermaster had evolved from terse exchanges to collaborative sessions, with Schmidt suggesting menu improvements based on available supplies. The kitchen, once foreign territory, had become a domain where Schmidt held recognised authority. British officers now requested specific German specialties: proper sauerbraten aged correctly, rouladen with bacon and pickle filling, genuine Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte when cherries became available. This culinary diplomacy, conducted through spatulas and stockpots rather than treaties, had begun reshaping perceptions on both sides of the kitchen door. Summer 1944 brought unexpected abundance to British officer messes despite nationwide rationing. The small refrigerated room at Camp 18 near Oxford left Hauptgefreiter Franz Becker speechless. After 2 years preparing meals from dwindling Wehrmacht rations, where meat had shrunk to 150 grams weekly per officer and butter vanished entirely, he stood before shelves that contradicted everything he knew about wartime scarcity. "Is this only for officers?" Becker asked the quartermaster sergeant, gesturing toward the 12 pounds of butter, 36 eggs and 4 legs of lamb. "Standard allocation for 48 hours, the sergeant replied. "Supply boat came yesterday from New Zealand. The cheese is Canadian. Oranges from Palestine." Military records confirm these supply chains functioned effectively despite U-boat threats. According to Ministry of Food statistics, Officer messes receive priority allocations from Commonwealth sources. 14,000 tons of butter from New Zealand annually, 27,000 tons of beef from Argentina, 18,000 tons of sugar from the Caribbean. These goods travelled in refrigerated holds of convoy vessels, arriving at Liverpool and Portsmouth for military distribution. The German cook's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted a glass bottle of genuine olive oil, a luxury unseen in Germany since 1941. Wehrmacht officers in North Africa had received synthetic oil produced from coal through complex industrial processes. This golden liquid from Spain represented not merely an ingredient, but an intact supply network spanning multiple countries. Most shocking to the German cooks was the casual treatment of these precious resources. At Camp 42 in Yorkshire, Feldwebel Werner Keller observed British officers leaving food on plates, discarding bread crusts, and returning barely touched desserts. When Keller implemented the German practice of reserving leftovers for stocks and sauces, the British kitchen supervisor seemed surprised at the efficiency. "Your Wehrmacht training?" he asked. "My grandmother's training," Keller corrected. "In Germany, waste has been unforgivable since 1914. The contrast with German military provisions was stark. According to captured Wehrmacht supply documents, by 1944, German officer rations had fallen to approximately 2,400 calories daily, still exceeding frontline soldiers' 1,800 calories, but far below the British officer allocation of 3,700 calories. German officers received 200 grams of meat daily when available. British officers received 340 grams daily without interruption. At Camp 91 near Edinburgh, Unteroffizier Hans Müller encountered whiskey for the first time. The amber liquid, allocated to officer messes at 1 bottle per 8 officers weekly, represented pure luxury in a nation ostensibly fighting for survival. When tasked with preparing sauce Diane for venison, Müller measured the prescribed 3 tablespoons of single malt with disbelief. "We use this amount of schnapps for 50 men on Christmas," he told his assistant. "They pour it on meat." The British officers' liquor cabinet further challenged German assumptions about Allied resources. Each mess maintained inventory that typically included whiskey, Scotch and Irish, gin, brandy, French and Spanish, rum, Jamaican and Navy issue, port, sherry, and various liqueurs. These supplies arrived through official channels, documented in quartermaster records, despite civilian restrictions limiting spirit purchases to 1 bottle monthly per household. Even tea, that quintessential British necessity, revealed surprising abundance. While German soldiers had subsisted on ersatz coffee, brewed from roasted barley and acorns since 1942, British officer messes received weekly allocations of Darjeeling, Ceylon and Assam teas, each designated for specific times of day. The German cooks observed with amazement as perfectly good tea leaves were discarded after a single use, a practice unthinkable in resource-starved Germany. Fresh fruit provided perhaps the most visible contrast. By 1944, German civilians received fruit only during local harvest seasons, approximately 8 weeks annually. German officers fared only slightly better. British officer messes, however, received oranges from Palestine, bananas from Jamaica, though rarely, apples from Canada, and pineapples from Africa. These items appeared regularly in desserts and as breakfast accompaniments. At Camp 17 in Cornwall, Obergefreiter Fritz Weber maintained detailed records comparing his pre-capture experience with current observations. His notebook, confiscated but preserved in military archives, documented the disparity. German officer mess, January 1944, casino, meat ration 170 grams, potatoes 200 grams, fat 30 grams, sugar 20 grams. British officer mess, June 1944, Cornwall, meat ration 340 grams, potatoes unlimited, fat 60 grams, sugar 70 grams. The German cook struggled with unfamiliar British ingredients. Marmite, the yeast extract spread British officers demanded on toast, repulsed most German palates with its intense saltiness. Worcester sauce seemed unnecessarily complex compared to German vinegar-based condiments. HP sauce, with its tamarind and date base, presented flavor profiles unknown in European cooking traditions. Most perplexing was the British approach to vegetables. Despite having access to fresh produce, British military tradition demanded lengthy cooking that reduced vegetables to soft, uniform consistency. When German cooks preserved some texture in carrots and cabbage, several older British officers complained about undercooked vegetables, while younger officers praised the innovation. For German military cooks, trained to extend dwindling supplies through creative substitutions, the challenge now became managing abundance. At Camp 122 near Manchester, Gefreiter Walter Schmidt found himself permitted to order supplies from a quartermaster list containing 157 items, compared to the 32 items available to Wehrmacht officers by late 1943. With these ingredients, I could feed 3 companies, Schmidt remarked to his British supervisor. Just make certain the brigadier's eggs are properly cooked, came the pragmatic reply. 2 minutes, not a second more. These encounters with British abundance created cognitive dissonance for men raised in Germany's economy of scarcity and sacrifice. Each wheel of Stilton cheese, each bottle of port, each tin of tropical fruit contradicted years of propaganda about Britain's imminent collapse. The German cooks absorbed these lessons not through proclamations, but through daily inventory counts, through meals prepared and consumed, through the steady rhythm of well-supplied kitchens operating in a nation supposedly starving under blockade. By winter 1944, the kitchen at Grisdale Hall had become a curious neutral territory. Major William Harrington lingered after dinner, leaning against the doorframe as Feldwebel Müller meticulously cleaned copper pots to a mirror shine. The conversation began, as it often did, about food. Harrington's mother's roast compared to Müller's grandmother's Sauerbraten, but gradually drifted toward memories of Munich, where Harrington had studied briefly in 1936. "Your English is remarkably good, Müller," the Major observed, not for the first time. "Hotel school required it," Müller replied, wiping his hands on his apron, no longer the coarse military issue but proper chef's cotton, supplied after British officers complained about lint on their plates. Many American guests before the war. These conversations, replicated across dozens of camps throughout Britain, represented an unplanned experiment in cultural diplomacy. War Office records document increasing instances of fraternization within appropriate professional boundaries between British officers and German kitchen personnel. At Camp 17 in Cornwall, British officers began inviting Obergefreiter Weber to sample wines for dinner service, valuing his pre-war experience as restaurant sommelier. At Camp 23, German cooks joined the weekly menu planning meeting, not merely to receive instructions, but to contribute suggestions. This limited integration extended to living quarters. While regular German prisoners occupied standard POW barracks housing 24 men in Spartan conditions, cook staff increasingly received separate accommodations closer to kitchens. At Featherstone Park, Karl Schmidt and his team occupied converted storage rooms adjoining the mess building, small but private spaces that other prisoners viewed with undisguised envy. This preferential treatment created inevitable tension, with some hardline Nazi prisoners condemning the cooks as collaborators. "They call us traitors," Feldwebel Keller wrote in a letter to his wife, preserved in British intelligence files. "But I have learned more about food in 6 months here than in 5 years with the Wehrmacht. When I return to our restaurant, these recipes will serve us well." The British officers, initially skeptical, developed appreciation for the German cooks that transcended utility. Intelligence assessments from 17 camps noted marked improvement in relations and development of mutual professional respect. At Christmas 1944, officers at 9 camps included German kitchen staff in holiday celebrations, sharing drinks and small gifts, behavior officially discouraged but tacitly permitted by pragmatic commanders. The most visible symbol of this evolving relationship appeared in modified uniforms. While regular German prisoners wore standard issue with prominent POW markings, kitchen staff received white chef jackets with small POW insignia. This distinction, seemingly minor, represented significant psychological separation between those who remained primarily prisoners and those who had become, however conditionally, professionals again. At Camp 42, Feldwebel Werner Keller taught British officers how to properly taste wine, introducing the concept of comparing vintages from different regions. In exchange, Major Geoffrey Simmons explained cricket, using salt and pepper shakers to demonstrate bowling techniques during quiet afternoons. These cultural exchanges, documented in multiple diaries and post-war interviews, created spaces where national identities temporarily receded behind shared interests. Language acquisition accelerated through daily interaction. According to educational records from Camp 91, German cooks achieved functional English proficiency approximately 3 times faster than other prisoners attending voluntary classes. Their vocabulary remained heavily culinary: simmer, braise, and garnish before democracy or parliament, but extended gradually to broader conversation. British security naturally maintained vigilance. The German kitchen staff underwent regular screening, with counterintelligence officers conducting monthly interviews to assess political reliability. Yet according to declassified reports, these professional cooks presented minimal security concerns. Their primary allegiance appeared increasingly tied to their craft rather than fading ideology. The war's progression became unavoidable knowledge in these kitchens. German cooks overheard officers discussing the Allied advance through France, the liberation of Paris, the destruction of German cities. Official news reached regular prisoners through controlled channels, but kitchen staff absorbed unfiltered information through casual conversation while preparing meals or cleaning up after officers finished dining. At Camp 186, Unteroffizier Heinrich Brandt maintained a secret map of the Western Front, using information gleaned from officer discussions, recording Allied progress with pinpricks on paper hidden beneath his mattress. His motivation, revealed in post-war interviews, wasn't continued resistance, but growing certainty that Germany faced inevitable defeat, knowledge that required psychological adjustment before eventual repatriation. By February 1945, German cooks at multiple camps began providing intelligence about problematic prisoners. At Featherstone Park, Karl Schmidt quietly informed the British adjutant about 2 recent transferees attempting to organise escape efforts. At Camp 23, Gefreiter Otto Weber identified hardcore Nazi agitators intimidating moderate prisoners. This cooperation, documented in security reports, stemmed less from political conversion than pragmatic self-interest. Stability preserved their privileged positions. They warn us about troublemakers, not because they love England, Captain James Wilson wrote in a report to War Office superiors, but because they have re-established professional identities worth protecting. Their conversion comes through practical benefits rather than political re-education. The statistics tell the story of this transformation. According to military records, POWs working in kitchens represented just 4% of the German prisoner population, but accounted for 23% of prisoners rated Category C, those considered sufficiently denazified for minimum security. Their escape attempt rate remained near zero despite opportunities afforded by their relative freedom of movement. When visiting American officers toured British POW camps in early 1945, they expressed surprise at German cooks preparing meals for Allied personnel. The American approach had segregated food preparation completely, maintaining strict separation between prisoners and their captors. The British system, initially born from necessity, had evolved into something more complex, a laboratory for post-conflict integration. At Griesdale Hall, Major Harrington's conversation with Müller concluded with an unprecedented request. A visiting general would arrive the following week, and Harrington wanted a proper German Black Forest cake, Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, for the occasion. "My wife experienced it in Berlin before the war," Harrington explained. "Said nothing in England compared." Müller nodded, already calculating adaptations for available ingredients. "I will need real kirsch," he said. "Cherry liqueur, not essence." "I'll speak with the quartermaster," Harrington replied. "Consider it arranged." This small exchange, an English officer seeking authentic German cuisine to impress his superior. A German prisoner taking pride in properly representing his culture's culinary tradition, represented transformation unachievable through formal re-education. In the kitchen, beneath the daily rhythms of feeding hungry officers, a subtle reconstruction of post-war possibilities had already begun. The thin blue airmail paper crinkled as Karl Schmidt carefully composed his monthly letter home. March 1945. Rain tapped against the small window of his private quarters adjacent to the Featherstone Park officers' mess. After 18 months in British captivity, his letters had evolved from terse reassurances of survival to detailed descriptions of his work. He knew British censors would read every word, yet increasingly felt compelled to document his unexpected reality. "The spring lamb arrived yesterday," he wrote, "raised on nearby farms and superior to anything we served in North Africa. I prepared it with rosemary and garlic for 30 officers. The colonel requested seconds and asked for my recipe. Tomorrow we receive fresh asparagus, in March, shipped from southern France through supply channels that functioned despite the U-boats we were told controlled the seas." These letters, carefully preserved in British intelligence archives, reveal the psychological evolution of German military cooks as the war approached its conclusion. Analysis of 1,742 censored letters from 174 German cooks working in British officer messes shows a consistent pattern. Initial disbelief at British resources, growing professional pride in their work, and gradual acknowledgement of Germany's inevitable defeat. Unteroffizier Hans Müller's letter from Camp 91 near Edinburgh, dated February 12, 1945, exemplifies this transformation. "We were told England starved under our blockade. Yesterday I prepared dinner using Argentine beef, Canadian butter, Caribbean sugar, and Ceylon tea." The supply officer mentioned these deliveries arrive with such reliability that they maintain only 7 days reserve. If this is a nation facing shortages, what does that suggest about the fatherland? British intelligence recognized the propaganda value of these observations. According to declassified reports, selected letters received priority clearance through censorship, ensuring descriptions of British abundance reached German families. These messages, arriving from trusted relatives rather than enemy broadcasts, carried credibility that formal propaganda couldn't achieve. At Camp 23 in Yorkshire, Gefreiter Otto Weber had begun signing his kitchen creations. Each menu bore his name beneath dishes like Kalbschnitzel à la Weber or Otto's Apfelstrudel. This professional identity, reconstructed from the ashes of military defeat, provided psychological refuge as news from Germany grew increasingly grim. When British officers complimented his cooking, Weber stood straighter, temporarily forgetting his prisoner status. The transformation extended beyond professional pride. At Camp 186, Heinrich Brandt approached the British chaplain after overhearing officers discuss the liberation of concentration camps. The conversation, documented in the chaplain's monthly report, revealed profound disillusionment. He asked if the reports were true, as he could not believe Germans would commit such acts. When shown photographs from newspapers, he became physically ill. 3 days later, he requested permission to prepare special meals for Jewish officers visiting the camp, a small gesture of atonement. This pattern repeated across multiple camps. According to security assessments, German cooks ranked among the first prisoner groups to openly acknowledge Nazi atrocities, perhaps because their daily interaction with British officers provided access to unfiltered information. Their responses ranged from disbelief to shame to desperate rationalization, but rarely included the denial common among regular prisoners. The statistics tell the story of ideological transformation. In January 1944, British intelligence classified only 7% of German cook personnel as Category C, significantly denazified. By April 1945, this figure had reached 68%, far exceeding the 23% rate among general prisoners. Military psychologists attributed this acceleration to several factors: daily exposure to British officers as individuals rather than enemies, restoration of professional identity beyond military status, and undeniable evidence of Allied resource superiority. At Grisdale Hall, Wilhelm Müller's transformation manifested in unexpected cooperation. When British intelligence sought information about a newly arrived prisoner suspected of involvement in war crimes, Müller voluntarily identified the man as former SS personnel he had encountered in Warsaw. According to the classified report, Müller stated, "He does not deserve protection. What they did dishonors all Germans." This cooperation extended beyond individual cases. At Camp 42, Werner Keller began informing British security about escape plots, identifying tunnels, and warning of potential breakout attempts. His motivation, revealed in post-war interviews, wasn't betrayal, but growing recognition that Germany's cause was lost. Each escaped prisoner would fight again, extending a war already decided. Better they should remain safe until peace came. By spring 1945, German cooks increasingly requested permission to remain in Britain after the war. Military records document 76 formal applications submitted before Germany's surrender, with applicants citing professional opportunities and fear of conditions in post-war Germany. British authorities established no formal program for such retention, though individual exceptions would later emerge through civilian employment. The psychological transformation culminated in reaction to Hitler's suicide and Germany's surrender in May 1945. Unlike the general prisoner population, where responses ranged from disbelief to despair to celebration, kitchen personnel generally displayed resigned acceptance. According to observer reports, most German cooks received the news while preparing meals, briefly acknowledged the information, then returned to their tasks with minimal disruption. At Featherstone Park, Karl Schmidt and his kitchen staff prepared dinner as usual on May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. The officers requested a celebratory meal, and Schmidt delivered a 5-course dinner featuring clear consommé, poached salmon, roast beef, cheese selection, and Black Forest cake. When British officers toasted victory, they unexpectedly included their German kitchen staff in raised glasses. "To peace," Colonel Harrington said, nodding toward Schmidt, "and to those who will help rebuild afterward." The German cook nodded silently, his expression complex. Relief, uncertainty, and professional pride intermingled. He had entered captivity as a Wehrmacht non-commissioned officer, defender of the Third Reich. He would leave as something different, a cook who had fed his captors well, and in the process, discovered truths about both sides that propaganda had obscured. That evening, Schmidt added a postscript to his monthly letter home. "The war has ended. I have learned much here that will serve us when I return. The English are not as we were told. Their victory comes not from brutality, but from resources beyond our imagination and determination we did not expect. We must prepare for a different future than promised." May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. The officers' mess at Featherstone Park hummed with celebration as Karl Schmidt supervised final preparations for the victory dinner. Union Jack flags draped across windows that had remained blacked out for 5 years. The gramophone played "God Save the King," followed by "Rule Britannia," anthems that once represented the enemy, but now signified simply the end of bloodshed. In the kitchen, Schmidt and his German assistants worked with practiced efficiency. They had prepared a menu that married British expectations with continental flourishes. Smoked Scottish salmon with lemon and dill, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, spätzle instead of standard potatoes, and for dessert, a proper Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte made with smuggled German kirsch preserved by the quartermaster for this specific occasion. As champagne corks popped in the dining room, Schmidt experienced conflicting emotions. Relief that the killing had stopped, concern for his family in Dresden, uncertainty about his future. When Colonel Harrington insisted the kitchen staff join officers briefly for a victory toast, Schmidt raised his glass mechanically, his mind already calculating the logistical challenges of returning to a defeated homeland. Across Britain that spring, 174 German military cooks in officers' messes faced similar dissonance. They had survived the war by feeding their captors well. Now, peace presented new questions about repatriation and reconstruction. The statistics tell their story. According to War Office records, 42 German cooks formally requested permission to remain in Britain after repatriation procedures began. Another 38 applied for temporary retention to complete professional training or secure civilian employment sponsorship. At Camp 186, Heinrich Brandt received an unprecedented offer from Major James Wilson: sponsorship to remain in Britain and open a proper German restaurant in York. The official documentation, preserved in immigration archives, cited exceptional culinary skills beneficial to post-war British society and complete denazification as justification for this rare deviation from standard repatriation protocols. Brandt's establishment, the Black Eagle, opened in September 1947 with financial backing from 3 former British officers he had cooked for in captivity. According to local newspaper accounts, the restaurant served authentic German cuisine prepared with Yorkshire ingredients and quickly became popular among former military personnel seeking flavours encountered during occupation duty. The Yorkshire Evening Post described opening night: patrons enjoyed genuine sauerbraten, potato dumplings, and apfelstrudel prepared by a former Wehrmacht cook who once fed Rommel's officers in North Africa. By 1950, 17 former German military cooks had established permanent residence in Britain, operating restaurants in London, Manchester, Bristol, and Edinburgh. Their establishments introduced post-war Britain to continental cuisine, previously experienced only by officers and occupation troops. Home Office records document 34 additional former cooks who remained temporarily before returning to Germany with British cooking techniques, recipes, and business connections that proved valuable during reconstruction. Wilhelm Müller returned to Munich in December 1946, carrying a handwritten recipe book containing both traditional German dishes and British specialties he had mastered. His restaurant Englischer Garten opened in 1951, offering Sunday roast alongside Weisswurst and attracting American occupation personnel and returning German businessmen alike. In a 1963 interview with Der Spiegel, Müller credited his wartime experience. "As a prisoner, I learned that enemies could share meals and eventually understanding. My restaurant continues this lesson." The culinary cross-pollination extended beyond individual establishments. British officers who had developed taste for German cooking during the war created unexpected demand for continental restaurants. Department stores in London and Manchester established German-style delicatessens by 1955, selling imported Wurst, proper rye bread, and pickled specialties introduced by former prisoners. According to import records, British imports of German food products increased 340% between 1950 and 1960, creating vital export markets for recovering German producers. More significantly, the German cooks who returned home carried first-hand knowledge of British society that contradicted years of propaganda. In post-war interviews conducted by occupation authorities, former kitchen personnel consistently reported that their experience undermined Nazi characterizations of the British as decadent, disorganized, and cruel. Their testimony, based on daily interaction rather than political re-education, carried particular credibility among skeptical German audiences. Otto Weber established a cooking school in Hamburg in 1952, teaching techniques learned from British Army chefs alongside traditional German methods. His curriculum included Yorkshire pudding, proper Sunday roast, and Christmas pudding, dishes previously unknown in German culinary tradition. According to school records, over 1,200 students trained under Weber by 1965, many finding employment in hotels serving occupation personnel and later international tourists. The influence extended to family traditions. Karl Schmidt's son, interviewed for a BBC documentary in 1978, recalled, "My father returned from England with strange recipes, meat with mint sauce, puddings with dried fruit. Our Sunday dinner was roast beef, not sauerbraten. He insisted this was civilization. learning from enemies rather than hating them. Perhaps most poignantly, Werner Keller maintained correspondence with British officers he had cooked for until his death in 1972. His collection of letters, donated to the German Historical Museum, documents evolving relationships that transformed from captor-prisoner to professional colleagues to personal friends. The final letter from Colonel Thompson, dated March 1972, states simply, "Your Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte remains unequaled in my experience. The war is long past, but friendship endures." When British occupation forces established officers' clubs in defeated Germany, several hired former POWs who had cooked for them in England, creating the extraordinary situation of Germans returning to professional positions similar to their prisoner work, but now in their homeland. Military records document 27 such appointments by 1948, with occupation authorities noting these individuals served as valuable cultural intermediaries during tense reconstruction. For the German cooks who had fed British officers during captivity, the war's end didn't erase their experience, but transformed it into unexpected opportunity. Their story represents an unplanned experiment in reconciliation through shared meals and daily interaction. While formal denazification programs achieved mixed results through lectures and examinations, the kitchen provided space for mutual respect to develop organically. The final assessment comes from Karl Schmidt himself, interviewed in 1970 for a German television documentary about POW experiences. "We entered British camps as enemies, became cooks by necessity, and left as men who understood that humanity exists on both sides of any conflict. The greatest weapon against hatred isn't propaganda, but sharing food across a table. When you prepare meals for your captors and they express genuine appreciation, something fundamental changes that no ideology can reverse." In officers' messes across wartime Britain, German military cooks and British officers inadvertently created a template for post-war reconciliation: one meal, one conversation, one small human connection at a time. The transformation that began with shock at being asked to cook for captors culminated in lasting cultural exchange that outlived the conflict itself.